Hello and welcome back to RPMbassy. Today I'm going to be talking about an album that is entirely inappropriate for this time of year. It's essentially the polar opposite of the weather that we've got at the moment, at least in the Northern Hemisphere. It is out and out a summer album, but I just really wanted to talk about it. And it's an album that I've loved for such a long time that I can't really be bothered with waiting for the summer to arrive. So today's album is Toshiki Kadomatsu's Sea is a Lady. This is a 1987 album from Toshiki Kadomatsu, who is a guitarist and vocalist. Although this one in particular, this is his 8th album, this isn't really a vocal-oriented album. So his previous album, Touch and Go, which we will probably get to one day, is a fantastic album with lots and lots of singing on it. He does a great job. It's like a fun city pop, a kind of rock album. This is a city pop album, but almost entirely instrumental. There are a couple of vocal bits and pieces here and there, but as far as I'm aware, they're not really his pieces. There's a couple of sort of choral kind of bits and like backing singer kind of things going on, but it is basically all just like jazz fusion guitar, city pop, like that sort of virtuoso style guitar playing that Japan seems to really have a knack for. Like so many like Japanese musicians have this incredible talent for interesting and fun sounding lines, and especially during the 80s, like the sort of rock and the city pop that was coming out of that sort of era. This is like an exemplary example of that. It's really such a great sounding album, and it's a very cool album as well, although it doesn't necessarily present itself as such, and we'll get to that in a moment. But just, you know, even down to like the artwork, the hype sticker, the way it's laid out, the colours, the design aspect of it, it's very evocative of that era. You know, the colouring on the font and everything, and all of that sort of stuff. It's so city pop. It's so that kind of era, that sort of late 80s kind of feel, and especially that Japanese sort of design aesthetic that a lot of people, especially nowadays, have really started to ape on and started to copy again. So I think it's like a cool album to really talk about now. That, you know, this kind of sound has sort of had a resurgence in recent years, and I think, you know, with the way YouTube is, especially where people will upload full albums, city pop in particular is like, just people love it. People absolutely love it. But, you know, this for this album especially, this is absolutely the way I reckon people should be trying to listen to it if they can. Yeah, so let's talk about it. Talk about some of the tracks on here. I want to jump in especially straight off the bat. So you've got two sides, obviously. It's a record, we all know that. But they've labelled them, you've got side 1, side 2, but they've also labelled it cute side and sexy side. That's on the back as well as on the disc itself, on the LP itself. And I love that kind of vibe. I don't know if I necessarily agree 100% that like one side is cute sounding, one side is sexy sounding. For me, the whole album is kind of sexy sounding. It's got a real swagger to it. And for me, like the cute aspect kind of is sort of lost in the shuffle a little bit. But there are some tracks that are a bit more thoughtful, perhaps would lend themselves to this kind of this cute adjective, perhaps. But let's just dive into the tracks to begin with. So the first track is essentially a lead up to track 2. So we'll talk about those together. Way to the Shore and Sea Line. So Way to the Shore is mostly this kind of little build up with a load of synthesizers and a little bit of very gentle slap bass. You know, it's kind of a oxymoron to say slap bass is gentle because you inherently have to smack the thing to get that sound out of it, but it could, to be honest, be synthesized. I'm not 100% sure. There's definitely real bass on here, but there's definitely a lot of like that Rompler sample PCM keyboard kind of sound, you know, like Korg M1, that kind of vibe going along the entire album, which I mean I love. If you've seen like previous videos where we're talking about Japanese stuff, like this kind of sound is something that I dig so much. Those like old Roland and Korg synthesizers, the vibe of it is just it's so immaculate and clean and polished sounding, while still having kind of that vintage nostalgia to it almost. Yeah, hard to explain. Maybe it's just me, but yeah, Way to the Shore. Essentially this rich sounding, sort of almost soundscapey kind of thing. This is where some of the vocals are, and I wonder whether or not the choice to put the vocals on the very first track was an intentional one to kind of lure people in and think, oh, it's another album much the same as we had with Touch and Go with the previous year. But then, you know, the rest of the album is basically all instrumental. Then you go into C Line, which has... It's a really guitar-oriented track, and it has such a great lead line. And for anyone who plays guitar, I highly recommend learning this song, because it's somewhat simple to play, but it's so fun to play. And I think that is kind of the album almost in a nutshell. It's just fun. Like it's not serious. It's not like trying to give too big of a message, you know, there's no words to convey any sort of deep meaning. It's a really fun sounding album, and this track C Line is like, it's the pinnacle of that in a way. Just the speed of it, you can very easily visualize yourself like, you know, driving an open top convertible and, you know, driving down by the seaside and stuff like that. It's excellent, absolutely fantastic. You've then got track 4 is C Song, and this is like a small little like ambient-ish piano type thing. It's the closest to what you would sort of expect of kind of like that, I guess, sort of Japanese compositional approach that you hear with a lot of Japanese composers. Whereas the rest of it is very jazz fusion. This has a little bit more of that kind of feel to it, but it's just a nice little palate cleanser almost. You know, we're only essentially 4 tracks in, but because it's so fast paced and it's hitting you with such, you know, this energetic music, it is kind of nice to actually bring it back down a bit and then we'll go back up. It's just like a short piece to give you a little bit of a breather. I think it's only about 2 minutes long as well. So that's, you know, the cute side 1. Side 2, the sexy side, this is where it does really kick off. I certainly agree with the sexy aspect of this, but as I say, I think the whole album, it should be the sexy side almost. So the first track on side 2, I'm not going to try and butcher the pronunciation, but it does have bracketed Memories of Dusseldorf, and this is a really phenomenal sounding track as well, and has, like, this is probably the fastest song on the album. If you're familiar with any of the Mario Kart games and the sort of jazz fusion that you get in those kind of games, I believe a lot of it is composed by a band called T-Square. This is almost like bang on the same. Like, if you know that sort of thing, you'll know what you're getting into with that track. Really long track as well, which, you know, for such a fast sounding, high energy track, I think it's over 6 minutes, and that really, like, granted, you know, in the studio you can punch out, you can punch in, you can do as many takes as you want, but to be able to like replicate that live, and also just for the listener, as I was sort of saying, that sort of almost ear fatigue that you get, it's really high pace. It's like really gets your heart going in a way. Next up, there's the song The Bass Battle. Perfect title. It's so much slap bass all over the shop, and what excellent playing. I get that a lot of people probably would be turned off by that just because it's got that kind of particular aesthetic that doesn't fit in more than a few genres. You know, it kind of sits in this kind of funky city pop kind of fusion kind of world, and not many other places. You know, you couldn't have like an acoustic band with a slap bassist, or a metal band with sort of a funky slapping bassist, but that track is excellent. Final track on here again is sort of one that brings you down. It's one called Sea Song, again, but reprise. And that is even more ambient than the initial Sea Song. And it's such a lovely way to wind down the album. It's almost like you've got this kind of day to night cycle for the album, where you've got, you know, this kind of the cute side, you're going out for the day, it's, you know, it's a date, and then the sexy side, like nightclubs and dancing and stuff, and almost there's a vibe of like the street racing kind of feeling and stuff like that as well, with Memories of Dusseldorf, and then Sea Song, you know, that's the end of the night, everything's dark, everything's shut off. What a lovely way to round it out. I know it's a very quick rundown that I've given you, but it's a very quick album. It's very frenetic in a way, and yeah, I think compositionally, in some ways, instrumental music especially can get very, very easy to be bored of. And in some circumstances, these songs do blend together, but I don't think that's a negative thing. I think it's to its advantage, because it does feel like this sort of overall experience, and I don't think anything lingers long enough to be boring. You know, total track time or album time, I think, is about sort of 40 minutes, and that for me is like that's in the sweet spot. I think anything more than that for just instrumental music, and you could potentially get a little bit tired of it. But that sort of like 41 minute zone really does, I mean, that rocks. That's spot on for this kind of sound, this sort of presentation, and the way the tracks are laid out. I know John mentioned last week about the importance of how tracks are laid out and how they're put together, and yeah, this has been carefully thought out, I think, with the intention of giving you those peaks and valleys to kind of keep the flow going correctly for the listener. So yeah, excellent album. Just go over some of the liner bits and pieces as well. This is where all the personnel are listed. Obviously, back piece there, I don't know what that says. It's all in Japanese, and I cannot read Japanese. And then you've got in here all of the different personnel involved. Really nice job just like getting everyone's photo on there, and I love the sort of the in-studio aspect of it, whether or not these are specifically photos from the sessions themselves or just sort of photos they had from whatever session, but I'd like to think that they are from the sessions for the album itself. And this is just like a presentation of people at the top of their game. I've mentioned it before with other albums, the way that like certain albums are sort of put together to really show people at their absolute best, and this is it. Like, I don't think anyone has a single bum note on here, and you know, especially shout outs to Toshiki Kadomatsu's guitar playing, especially. Like, it's so fun and soulful and funky, and like a guitar tone that you wouldn't typically think would work. It's got almost like a fizzy quality to it. It kind of almost sounds like it's coming through a small amplifier rather than like this big sort of stadium rock kind of vibe that you would sometimes expect. But it works with it, you know. I think because you've got such a full mix with all of these keyboards and a ton of reverb. I tell you what, there is a lot of reverb on this album. I think that kind of slightly more shrill and sharp guitar tone just helps those lead lines cut through, and it's almost like a very good like tenor kind of singer cutting through with a lot of clarity in their voice. And yeah, just sort of a little bit of information there with who takes part in what track. A lot of programming for synthesizers and things, tons of credits for programming and drum machines, which is really nice to see. As I say, I just love that kind of sound. I love that vibe. But yeah, this one is such an excellent album to listen to and pick up if you can. It's not the cheapest thing. I believe there was a reissue in either like 2016 or 2017. There was actually a re-recording of it in 2017 as well. So I'm pretty sure there was like an initial or original version and the re-recorded version re-released both at the same time. For me, having listened to both, this for me is my preference, but I think that, you know, that could just be what you hear first is, you know, you kind of grow used to that. And this is the one that I heard first before the re-recording version ever existed. So for me, this is the one that I really dig, but the re-recorded version, absolutely grand as well. As I say, it's not the cheapest thing in the world. I think you're typically looking at around sort of the 45 to 50 pounds for sort of a standard pressing of this. But for me, you know, not only is it an imported album, which in my head at the very least is sort of inherently add on a bit of tax, just in terms of someone had to get it over here in the first place. Even if it's already in the country, it had to get here in a more expensive way somehow. And for me, the presentation of it, the fact that this is an older album that is not necessarily as widely known as some others could be, that, you know, get repressings every other year, and special editions and picture discs and clear color pressings and all this stuff. You know, it's just that it's a really nice, well printed or well pressed black vinyl. Sounds excellent, with excellent tracks start to finish, and it's just such a treat to have, such a treat to listen to. And so if you can get your hands on a copy, please do. If not, then there's plenty of places you can listen to it. As I mentioned earlier, on YouTube, everybody, you know, is uploading these sorts of things on the daily at this point, you know, full album streams. And I think the sort of rights management for Japanese musicians especially is either less bothered by it, or perhaps they just don't know. And certainly, like, when you look at streaming distribution for these sorts of bands, it's very difficult to find a lot of these sorts of albums. Toshiki Kadomatsu in particular, actually, I think he's only got like 5 or 6 albums that are available on streaming. And to be fair, in this case, I'd rather listen to it this way. Streaming is a convenience. It's not the optimum way. But I mean, he's still going. I believe he released an album last year, and like a couple of years before that. Like he is prolific, to say the least. So check out his stuff. Check this album out in particular. One day we'll definitely have a look at Touch and Go, because that's a phenomenal album as well, and I really want to talk about that. But this is the grail for me. Toshiki Kadomatsu's "See Is a Lady." Thank you for watching.